Hey, welcome to Slay Academy. This is Khalil from Slay, and today we'll talk about different types of interviews that tech companies take and how you can prepare for them to get started with. Let's try to understand what kind of skills tech companies are looking to judge by other interviews. So you can broadly divide that into actually three types of skills. 1. They want to know about your problem-solving skills, which is, are you good with data structures? Do you know your data structures and algorithms? Can you solve a basic problem-solving kind of question or not? That's one type of thing that companies want to judge for. Second, system design. System design gets more and more important with seniority. So usually very little focus on this at a fresh graduate role. But more and more, if you go 6 years, 10 years experience, this is more important. But system design, further divided into low levels and high level design, is about how you design the code base of your projects and how do you design different parts of your software to talk to each other, right? And finally, the third set of skills that companies are interested in is your ability to build projects, your software development and project building ability. So we'll take each of these one by one, break it down into which kind of companies focus on which of these skills and what are the interview formats like. So we will start off with data such as algorithms. Now, this is sort of like the bread and butter of the interviewing process of all large companies and why. Let's try to understand. In most large companies there are a lot of internal teams which are working on a lot of different types of technologies. So they do want to make sure that as a generic software developer, how good your skills are, can you be thrown any random problem and you'd be able to solve that or not? That's a very important thing for them. They don't want to know whether you are a good React developer or a good Node.js developer or a good Android developer. That's not what they are primarily trying to look at. They're looking at, are you a good generic software developer who can be thrown any problem statement and you can come up with a solution. With the second problem also for the hiring process of larger companies is the necessity for removal of bias. They want their interview process to be as objective as possible, so that the result of whether somebody is selected or not selected does not depend on who was taking the interview and what the question was, so that somebody cannot come and say that this other person was able to get into the company because they were asked easier questions or because the interviewer likes them more than they like me. Right? So that's where data structure algorithms questions are a much more standardized format, and usually this gets asked in two ways. 1. Usually in your first round, you might be given an online coding round, which is on a platform like Hacker, Rank, Hacker, Interview, Bid, these kinds of platforms. You would be given a set time limit, 1 hour or 2 hours, and then you would be asked to solve 2 to 5 data structures, algorithms, related questions. They would be more in a puzzle kind of a format. They might have an elaborate problem statement, or they might be very directly asking that, okay, here's a binary tree, and you have to flatten it so that every node comes after the last node of the previous element and all of these things. So either it would be very straightforward manipulating a data structure, or they might be given a certain sort of puzzle kind of question around it. But it has to be solved using a data structure. Or in Columbus, and for these kinds of rounds, obviously going and practicing a lot of these questions from sites like Interview, Bid, LeetCode, these kind of places is of course helpful. Okay. Then the second way the same skill gets judged is usually an interview which is called whiteboarding, used to be the name. When this used to happen on site, which is somebody's call to the office, you say that, okay, this is an algorithm, can you write it on the board? Kind of a thing. But nowadays this happens over something called a phone screen. A phone screen means you're generally connecting over Zoom or Google Meets or a platform like that. And you have to write code in a Google Doc. So usually what people are checking is not whether you put your semicolons in the correct place or not, and your syntactical grammatical level checks, but they are seeing that without an ID giving you autocomplete sort of help. Can you write down an algorithm basically on a blank sheet of paper or not? Right again. Practicing a lot of difficult data factual questions are important for this, and some companies are known to ask really tricky and difficult questions like Google and Facebook especially. They are known so that their hiring bar is higher, so their dataset algorithm questions are a little more difficult. But this is sort of, I would say 70% to 80% of all tech interviews definitely involve at least one of the other formats of testing. Data factors and algorithm skills. So next let's talk about system design and system design. Also there is low-level design as well as high-level design. And with low-level design, people are checking your ability to structure the code base itself. So a single project, like if you're creating an API, creating an app, how would your data structures inside your project communicate with each other? How do you manage the state? How would you manage connections to your database? All of these things. And how to design the schema, like the data that you're storing, what object would be related to other objects, right? And high-level design is more about, let's say you have to build an entire e-commerce system or you have to make a streaming service. So what different services in the back end do you need? Do you need a payment service? You need uploading and a downloading service. Maybe you need a service which takes care of signing up users and providing authentication tokens for the user. What would the API be designed like? And maybe between two services there is a difference of speed. So you might want to add a queue between them so that the slower service can pick up things one by one. So the importance of these depends on your seniority. So if you are going for an SD2 sort of a role, if you have 2 to 6 years, kind of experienced, the low-level design interviews are definitely going to be coming. That's sort of very important in a staple part of the interview process. And as you get even more senior, like from 5 years and plus kind of seniority level, where your responsibilities at that company is going to involve designing the architecture of the system there, the high-level design questions will also come. Let's take a look at what's the format of this interview. So with a low-level design interview, there are two ways it can happen. One is that it's called machine coding around, where generally you are given a 2-hour to 4-hour window. Somebody might be connected with you on the other end or might not be connected, and you might be recorded or something. And you're asked to actually build a subsystem of a project, like, let's say for a ticketing system, we have to build like once the payment is starting to be done, we have to block the seats. And when the payment is done successfully, the seats have to be allocated. If they are not successfully done, the seats have to be freed up. Design this system. You don't have to create an actual app or a website. You don't even have to create an API for this. You just have to create the functions which can make this work. So if you are a back-end engineer, by the way, then you would understand that this actually checks for the service layer of your code, your domain logic or business logic of your code that's getting tested. You get a few hours to build it. In those few hours, if possible, if you can write maybe 1 or 2 tests which make sure that all the use cases are covered, that's great. And post you have built it, the interviewer might be discussing a few corner cases, how you would handle that, how you would secure it. Maybe they would give you some extra constraints. And how do you apply those constraints and change your project from there? Apart from machine coding around, you might also be given a take-home project. For low-level design, a take-home project would be you'd get 24 to 48 hours out of time. You might be asked to create a command line-based project, let's say command line-based system, which checks the score of the latest cricket match that's happening. How do you check the scores? How do you cache it, at which frequency you would fetch that data and show it? Generally, even in a take-home interview, you would not be asked to create an end-to-end website or an application in a low-level design take-home interview. And that's why you would be given 24 to 48 hours of time, and people are going to be looking at how well your code is decoupled. Is it extendable? Can new processes be added? Can new types of data be added? The relationships are scalable or not. You have indexed the things correctly, and now that's going to be checked for awk. And finally, there's another third sort of, I would say, lower-level design checking round that's starting to prop up a bit. It's called a debugging round, where somebody has given you a system where there is a bug. And some companies go so far as to ask you which languages and frameworks you are good at, and they will give you a project in that particular language of the network, and they will tell you that, okay, there is either a bug, or they will say that, okay, this system has a bit of a problem. Sometimes you might have to figure out the bug, and sometimes they will say that here's the problem. The number of requests have increased a lot and now the system has become very slow. So here's the problem. I've just opened the code base in front of you. Can you modify the source code so that this problem gets solved or this bug gets fixed? That's debugging. That's not so common, but it is getting a little bit common these days since remote hiring has been happening, and some companies have been doing this. Let's talk about the next high-level design questions in the next episode. Follow Slay Academy for more.